Welcome back to the Sports Source. This segment brought to you by A.G. Hines Company. If you're a do-it-yourselfer and you see a new trend, the neighbor has done something you like, but you think, who would have the materials to do that, and who could help me through that process of doing it myself? A.G. Hines Company. That's who can help you. That's who's got all the materials in the world. Any new trend, any new marvel that's come along, tools, materials, they are the building supply gurus, and they have been for 100 years. That's all you need to know. If you've been around a century, pretty good business right there. 4 generations strong, A.G. Hines Company. All right, as of last Saturday, let me read some numbers here. As of last Saturday, Tennessee was down 44 bodies and couldn't really have a scrimmage. 7 or 8 of those cases were COVID. And this is Pruitt said 7 or 8 were COVID, 27 or 28 were contact tracing quarantines. Then you had about 10 guys who were also out with normal football injuries. South Carolina's situation, not so bad. Will Muschamp said this week that the Gamecocks have only 2 active cases of COVID and only 9 players out for quarantine. Also, in South Carolina, they just have a 10-day quarantine, not a 14-day quarantine. And much to Muschamp's credit, he has said the SEC has to get us all on the same page. And we were talking before the show. The SEC did put out guidelines, but apparently those are guidelines, not rules. I agree with Muschamp. The SEC should say, all right, what is the worst county, state protocol? What's the longest? That's what everybody's living with. Everybody's going to get the same deal. But right now, South Carolina, fewer missed practices, fewer guys out, and if they get guys that get sick right now, they could still be back for the game. Whereas if Tennessee has to put somebody in quarantine right now, they don't play. It's 14 versus 10. My question, I'll start with Chuck down there. Has this caused your guys at the Chucky C-Note Casino to move the line a little bit in South Carolina's favor? How big of an advantage is their lack of COVID issues on the team compared to Tennessee having a lot of issues?
Well, you would think it has to be some. And as it gets closer to kickoff is when you really want to try and monitor it. From what I've seen, the game is really close to a pick 'em anyway. I mean, I would have South Carolina as a slight favorite playing at home. But obviously, to me, it's a factor because it's, to me, how much different is this from a regular injury report where players may not be available? And are they key players? So, yeah, I mean, it has to affect it some.
Yeah, I don't think it guarantees anything, but logic would say this team has had more practice time with more players on the field than this team. Advantage this team, correct?
Well, I think, it goes back to the Jimmy's and Joe's X's and O's thing, and it goes back to some of the weird, schools would call them privacy concerns. I would call them complete lack of transparency.
Yes.
But it goes back to, who are you missing? The numbers can sort of lie. If you're missing,
you're missing half your team, though, 44 guys.
Yeah. For practice time, sure. Yep. But I think if you get guys back enough to play, and you've got, if of those, 44, only 8 of those guys were on the 2 deep, then that's sort of a different conversation than if you have, 30-some guys out, and that's most of your 2 deep. It's just, I think there's so much uncertainty of who exactly is missing where, and it's like you say 2 players are, COVID positive at South Carolina. Well, depending on who those 2 guys are, that can be extremely relevant or not very relevant. And I think this just goes into this whole season is going to be totally unpredictable for a lot of reasons, and that's probably at the top of the list: contact tracing and positive tests.
And I'm not saying South Carolina's going to win. I mean, as Chuck pointed out, we're still 2 weeks away. There's a lot of things could happen between now and then. But I think if you ask any coach in the country which of these situations you'd rather be in, they'd rather have South Carolina situation with fewer guys out.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you want as many practices as you can, especially as a coach, to get comfortable with that. What it's going to come down to, though, is can you overcome that if you have experience in certain positions, right? If you're Tennessee, you do have the quarterback coming back. You have running backs coming back. You have offensive line mainly coming back. So does your offense, can it survive something like a missed practice time better than someone else's that has a new system? Because there's a lot of teams this year putting in new quarterbacks and new systems. If they were missing that, then you call this double whammy. Yeah, they're in trouble. So it's going to depend which side of the ball, which people are the ones that are missing the most time, and is it a mental position or a real physical position? Offensive line would be your toughest. If you had new offensive linemen you were plugging in, that group's got to be working on the same page the most. So if you see where you're losing guys in that mix and they're coming in and out, that'd be the position I'd be like, man, that's where the unity needs to be. They got to be on the same page. So there are also certain positions that It's not a 1-for-1. If you miss, it can cause 2 other guys around you to be lacking in development that are still on the field.
It's already tough. You're trying to build team chemistry. You're trying to find playmakers, and yet you can't practice, and you're having to stay apart. You know, how are you able to mesh all of that together? I mean, that's a huge challenge.
I think a lot of it's going to come down to coaching too, and it's not going to be. You're not going to be able to look at it and say this guy's record was X, so he did a better job than this guy because his record was Y. Talent plays into that, obviously, but I think that those coaches who have less rigidity, who are more adaptable, they've got to be an advantage this year. That they can break things down and say, all right, look, we usually do it like this. Out the window, we're doing it like this today. We're doing it a different way. I go back to the NFL strike year in '87. Bill Walsh got the replacement players in there. You know, he's got the Bill Walsh system. They didn't run it. They ran the wishbone with the 49ers because he said, this is more of these guys in college did this. It's easier to teach in a short time. This is what we're doing. I don't expect teams to go that far, but the point being a genius coach who's willing to say, all right, what have we got to deal with? Let's throw all this other crap. Let's do this because we've got time to do it. We can do it well. This is what we're going to do. I think there's a real advantage there for those coaches who are more easily adaptable.
Yeah, I think Jerry Pruitt kind of touched on that. You know, he's a guy who made his bones in high school. And in high school, you got who you got. And
Right.
every year you're sort of resetting. And, you know, maybe a kid has got to be out of town this week or whatever. You just figure it out. And, you know, maybe some of that's overstated, but I think thinking that way and not feeling like, I got to cram this,
Right.
you know, square peg into this round hole, I think can there's something to that. We'll see. This is going to be like a completely insane season. So.
When in doubt, simplify this year.
Yeah.
Don't, you know, this isn't the year to try to be the coach that outsmarts everybody. This is the year to be like, hey, get the guys in the right place. Don't make bust. Go out there and play. We'll figure it out. And that's where you got to go, because especially if you've got guys missing, it's got to be, you know, cover 2, base defense, guys, go make a play. That's where you got to be this year when you have the issues go against you. Get simple, go out there and put the guys out there, make them so they don't have to be thinking every play. That's your key.
Good deal. When we come back, we've already talked about what a weird year it is. It's a very, very weird year, and we're just a week or two into it. We're going to run through some of that next, and then a big question about how many games Tennessee actually gets to play this year. Now, we got bold predictions coming. We got a lot of roster talk coming up, team leaders, that kind of thing. So a lot of football. But next, I want to talk a little bit about just how bizarre a year it is and how that's going to impact Tennessee big picture. Come on back.